Welcome back, viewers and listeners. You are listening to Monday Down South featuring Evan, Cy, myself. We have a guest as well. Before we introduce the special guest, Cy and Evan, say hello.
What's up? What's up?
What's up, friends? Welcome back. Welcome back. Yeah, we got Mr. Alex Wynn over here. I think this one we don't really have to be too formal about because the three of us have been best friends with this guy since the beginning of high school. Been a decade-long friendship we got going on here. Not to get too sappy. Alex, welcome on, man. Good to have you on.
Thanks.
It's nice to see you here without a bowl of cereal for once. You know, we like to like to see you. Go ahead, buddy. Introduce yourself.
Thanks, guys. I really appreciate you guys having me on the pod. As you guys know, I've been a long-time listener, second-time caller in, so hopefully can improve a little bit on last time.
Love it.
And just to give a quick debrief over Alex, he was a great baseball player in high school. He's followed baseball his entire life. But his expertise lies in not baseball, not any of the regular sports, but CrossFit. Alex has been going to a CrossFit gym ever since he moved to Dallas a couple of years ago. But Alex, you're looking pretty pumped up over here. Did you hit a workout this morning, or are you taking it off easy on the weekends here?
He wakes up like that.
I did too many 12-ounce curls last night, so no workout this morning.
12-ounce curls.
Well, hey, regardless, Alex, I wanted to share a funny story with you before we kind of dive into the topics here. So Alex, our boy Alex here, just got a girlfriend, brought her to a drive-in movie theater a week or two ago, I believe. And so I got the idea in my head to go ahead and do that with my girlfriend. So I appreciate that. We went and saw 1917 the other weekend, and it was awesome.
Nice.
Like the entire setup of just like driving in. I'd never done something like that beforehand. So I'm not sure what movie you guys ended up seeing, but thank you for the idea and the heads up on that. And congratulations as well.
Yeah,
thanks, man. Yeah,
I'm more
going
upset
pretty well
about
so far. So
I'm more upset about the fact that you have a girlfriend. I'm just now hearing about it on the podcast, man. What is this nonsense?
Yeah, I was gonna break it to you guys at some point, but I haven't really talked to you guys lately. But
at some point, I had to call you out for that because I knew
I figured Zach was gonna call me out at some point. Yeah, we've been hanging out about a month or so and like officially dating for like 2 weeks. So it's been going well. Yeah,
that's awesome.
Good girl from Northern Virginia, actually. Like big sports fan. Went to Cornell, played tennis at Cornell. Big sporty girl, real good girl.
Wow. We love the girls that love sports on here. Maybe she'll have to be a guest one day. We'll figure. We know Zach's kind of set that up pretty well for us with Megan, so that's great.
Zach, I got to give you a hard time though. Obviously, Megan watches the pod, so you just blew all your originality with that date idea.
That's true.
Not that it matters, but
another funny thing is it was not just Alex that like popped the idea in my head, but it was also her. So like I turned it around. I was like, oh hey, happy birthday, and she was like, this was my idea from the first place. I was like, no, let's just keep going. Let's go.
So but Megan, if you're watching, all the ideas Zach has ever had have come from us, just so you know, and probably from this podcast. So,
I don't think that's
disclaimer.
True. I don't think that's true.
I mean, I'm going to take credit. All the ideas came from me. So, yeah.
None of them certainly have come from me. So, if you want to take all the credit and go for it, but.
Well, hey guys. All right. So getting back to sports here, Alex is dating a tennis player, but we're not talking about tennis today. We're talking about baseball. We're bringing it back to the MLB if there's a season here with the top 5 MLB baseball storylines, provided if there's a season or not. And so I think maybe we can go around and maybe Sai, you can start us off with your list and how you kind of drafted your top 5 storylines, and we can kind of hit the ground running on this. This is an exciting topic that I'm certainly not an expert over, but I'm excited to be on the podcast here and at least mention some of my top 5 if they're even credible or not. But I know you guys are definitely more credible in the baseball environment.
Should we update on the talks first, where we stand with the season?
Yeah,
because I think
that's a good way to start.
Yeah, I was going to say, because I think just last night, it basically, like, all talks between the MLBPA and Manfred and the MLB basically ended. So now it's just a matter of what the MLB wants to do, which I have a feeling is going to be somewhere in the 50 to 80 range in terms of the season length. And then I think the MLBPA was just like, all right, we're done negotiating. Let's just go play. Tell us when and where, and we'll roll with it. So I'd imagine it's going to be like a 60-game season or something like that. So.
Yeah. Do you guys have a breaking news little segment on this? Because I feel like that's pretty good breaking news to start off the pod.
That's exactly what we're doing right now. Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with Ev. It sounds like the hopes of them finding a deal anytime soon are pretty slim and none at this point, and it's going to be up to Rob Manfred to just say, hey, the season's starting at this point. The players are going to get their full salary, which is what they wanted, but at the end of the day, I think it's pretty disappointing that the two sides couldn't come to a deal and get baseball started sooner. Because at this point, like, they're not arguing over any health-related issues. It seems like they've squared that out. That's on the back burner. And what they're really arguing right now is just over economics, which, in my opinion, it's pretty disappointing that in a time when millions of people are unemployed and like the economy's tanking, that the MLB Players Association and the owners couldn't get together and find a deal about the economics to pay these guys who are making millions of dollars and everything like that. And they're arguing over a couple $100 million, which in the grand scheme of baseball economics is pretty slim and nil. So it's disappointing to me as a fan that they couldn't come to an agreement on this. But regardless, hopefully we get a date to start the season sooner rather than later and just can get on with our lives and baseball will be back.
Agreed. I fully agree with you. The other thing I want to talk about is I'm curious, like Evan was saying, the 50 to 80 game situation. I think obviously, with us being used to 160, it's going to feel weird no matter how many it is to say, hey, this is definitively enough for us to judge whether we're going to be able to have a full season or not. If you're saying from the most recent thing, it could be anywhere from 50 to 80 or 60. Like, is there like a confirmed number?
We don't know. I'm just going off the proposals because like the MLB is going to do whatever they want at this point. And the last thing they proposed, I think they ended up coming up to 76, but I have a feeling they're going to drop back down to whatever they originally proposed, which was like 50 some, or I think, and that's 60 or whatever.
And that's what I want to bring up because I want to say, like, how do you guys feel about the idea of 50 something games? Because I personally am not very excited at the notion of that. I thought they would do something closer to 80, which made me feel at least a little bit better because that's half the season, what, normally being 162 games, but 50 something games is absolutely ridiculous. Like, if you went back and looked at the standings 50 games into the season last season, that is not how we finished it out in terms of playoffs and who ended up where. The Nationals were like 17 games out of like the first place in the NL East last year, and they were World Series champions. So that just seems like way too little, but I guess they have to compromise somewhere. What are your thoughts on the number of games that we're probably going to end up with?
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Sai. I don't think 50 games is really enough to have a full legitimate season. I mean, I'd be comfortable with somewhere around the span of 80 games. You cut the season in half and you could make an argument to say, hey, like, this is a full legitimate season. But in baseball, we're a sport that any team can beat anybody on any given day. I don't think 50 games is really enough to say that these teams are truly better than everybody else. Because there's so much like short season, like weirdo, like variety that could happen with balls bouncing weird. That 50 games just really doesn't do the justice of it. And it sounds like they're going to expand the playoffs to kind of make up for some of that variability in the short term. So it'll be interesting to see what an expanded playoff. And I think the last rumor I heard was a 16-team playoff. But we'll see what that happens. So, but altogether, I'm pretty disappointed by the 50-game season.
Yeah.
Too short.
And just like reiterating off that point, Alex, like baseball has one of the it's like an aging fan base for the most part. Like the average age of a baseball fan is now like 58 years old in comparison to some of the other like popular sports in America. And so one thing that was frustrating from my end is they had the MLB had a great opportunity while all other sports were not going back to work. They were still trying to figure out their situation to like come together, players and owners, and try to like work out a deal and be kind of like one of those first sports back. Because I don't know about you guys, but with no sports, I'm willing to watch anything. I was watching like Bundesliga soccer the other day. I don't know any players, but I was just watching it just because it was something that was on. And I think the MLB had a great opportunity to really come out and say, hey, if we have like kind of, from a statistic standpoint, we have an aging fan base in comparison to the other sports in America. So like if we were to actually come back early and figure everything out early, we would actually be able to kind of grab that millennial crowd again and make baseball interesting again. I mean, it's interesting, but like to the millennial fan that doesn't have enough time, is always on their phones, not really paying attention to a 9-inning game, it'd be a great opportunity to try to like grab those fans back and like incentivize them to watch baseball again and get encouraged about it again. So I think I just wanted to reiterate, like, it is disappointing. It doesn't look like they're anywhere near a resolution. The last thing I saw was like a 72 game season, but then that was just straight up rejected by the MLB Players Association. And it's also, it is also like tough sympathizing with what's going on right now, because like Alex mentioned earlier, it's millionaires arguing with billionaires. And it's just, from a common fan or just like someone in America, it's hard to like sympathize with that. So, hopefully down the road they're able to reach a resolution, but I would like to see 80 games at least. But now that, it's mid-June, they probably wouldn't start until, if they were to work something out, like mid to late July. I don't know if they're willing to go into November or not, but I know that's kind of like a red flag, especially with a lot of the teams and whatnot. So hopefully they can work something out, but I'm a little dubious about an 80 game season at this point. I would expect to see something maybe more like 50, 60 games, just to be realistic within the MLB season.
And I will say, I don't want them to have to push back next season. If that means a shorter season this season, then to Alex's earlier point, the problem was they've been negotiating for months now, when if they could have just made a decision a month ago, which probably would have ended up being a similar decision, we'd be in a much better place. But I don't want them to push next season back.
One thing,
and then go ahead, Zach.
No, sorry, keep going. That was my fault.
I was just going to say, to Zach's point and Alex's earlier point, like, you look at like what the UFC has done. Like, I think they've gained a ton of fans because they've been able to pump out fights. And I mean, Dana White has come out and said that they're operating on some of these events even at a loss, which I don't really believe, because I don't think the gate has that much of an impact. But I mean, even if you're like, net even or something on these events, like, he's gained so many fans through all of this and been able to continue his, operations and move, his plans forward. Like, I think that's made just a huge difference in terms of fan engagement, as well as just the sport in general and being able to push things along.
One thing,
and going off of Evan. Oh, sorry, you can go.
No, you're good. I was just gonna say real quick, the one thing that kind of cracks me up about that is, if it ends up being a 16-team playoff format, like we were like potentially projecting, if you count the number of games that you'd have in series going forward, your playoffs would probably have the same number, if not more games than the regular season in that format. Like, it would be around the same if you ended up having close to 50-something regular season games and then had a 16-team playoff format. And that seems incredibly unfair when it comes to the MLB specifically, because like we were talking about earlier, it takes a lot more to understand when a team is actually good versus not good in the MLB, because it's purely like, on any given day, any team can win, and your pitcher pitches once every 5 games, right? So that's a little bit of a crazy notion. I don't know how I feel about the thought of playoffs being that long, and I'd rather them have a longer regular season and the traditional playoff format. I just think that makes more sense, but that's my thought.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. And at the end of the day, they're doing the expanded playoffs because of the television money, and there's so much more in the playoffs that way.
Exactly.
Which is kind of disappointing.
True.
But going off like Zach and Ev's earlier point, like, I do think baseball missed a huge opportunity to gain a larger share of the fan base, especially with something, if they would have opened the season on 4th of July, on America's birthday, being America's pastime. I think that was a grand opportunity. And I actually think I heard this was a Clay Travis idea, Zach, but they talked about potentially having a home run derby on the 4th of July as kind of like a season kickoff. And I think that would be awesome. Like, that would bring so much buzz around baseball and be a great way to kick off the season. But it doesn't sound like that's going to happen in the next 3 weeks or so.
Yeah. With that being said, though, and since we already are on the roll with the MLB, I think it's a good time to tee up the storylines and get to it. For today, I think Zach probably mentioned this, but it's going to be the top 5 MLB storylines going into the season. Hopefully we have a season soon. This is with the optimism that this will happen soon, and what we are looking forward to, or just what we're looking out for in terms of storylines. So, Alex, traditionally, I know you've seen a couple episodes, so you might already know how this works, but the way we do it is we're going to each start, give our number 5, go one by one, then give our number 4, go one by one, give number 3 all the way to 1. I think that's pretty straightforward. And I actually think that as our guest, our tradition is to let the guests go first. So, Alex, you want to start us off and give us your first storyline that you're looking forward to this season, or just what you think is a big storyline. So go ahead, buddy.
Okay, I'm going to start off with my number 5, which would be my favorite team, the Washington Nationals, doing their victory lap this year. It would have been fun to see, like, the players get the rings and everything like that, and then see how they would have done defending their title this year. So that would be the number 5 storyline that I'm looking forward to this year.
Fair enough. That's simple. Zebo, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, actually, that's probably a good transition into mine because I labeled my 5, can Bryce bring another championship to DC? I think, with the Nats losing Anthony Rendon, it'll be interesting to see. Obviously, they still have one of the best pitching rotations in the league with Scherzer and Strasburg and who's the other guy? Corbin as well. Yeah, Corbin's nice. He's really, really good. So, obviously their pitching's going to be there. Their hitting might take a step back, but I just think maybe even at large, the NL East is going to be very interesting because you have the Braves with Acuna and Freddie Freeman. You have, some of the other, I guess like the Mets, right? With the Mets getting some of the new acquisitions in pitching, you have like the best pitcher in baseball and DeGrom. And I think that, the NL East in general will just be an interesting division. It'll be between those 3 teams, who's going to actually come to the top. And you also have the Phillies as well. So you never know what the Phillies are going to do. So that's my 5.
You actually parlayed. This wasn't going to be my 5, but I do have it on my list. So I'll just move the list around a little bit. But one of mine was, how does the NL East shake out? Because obviously, like, the Nats are coming off the title, but they did lose a lot, obviously, with Rendon. So we'll see where the lineup stands. I mean, it should still be good. And obviously the pitching, like you said, Zach, is solid. And then you have the Mets, who I guess Syndergaard's had Tommy John now, which is that's right, Cy, right?
Mm-hmm. It is.
Yeah. So that's a big hit. But I mean, if you look at that team top to bottom, I mean, a pretty stacked roster overall with the lineup, and you look at the improvements they made in the bullpen with Betances, and you got to think a bounce back year from guys like Edwin Diaz and Familia out of the bullpen. I mean, the lineup is pretty stacked, and then some depth acquisitions. Cy, I'm sure you can talk on it more than me, so I don't want to take your thunder on the Mets. But in the starting rotation, and then my team, the Braves, who I'm just obsessed with. If their young pitching can step up, obviously the lineup is insane. And then who knows what the Phillies can bring, but I mean, that's a pretty talented roster as well. So one of mine was just like, how does the NL East shake out? I mean, you have 4 pretty legitimate, 3 contenders. And then, we'll see what the Phillies bring, but I think that's a really interesting division this year.
Yeah, so to be completely honest with you guys, I do also have the NL East on my list as well, which should not be surprising to anyone. As big of as Alex is a Nats fan, I'm just as big of a Mets fan, and obviously was very excited for the start of the season because Av kind of teed that up perfectly. Although I will wait and talk about it a little bit later because I have a lot to say about it, and I do have something else that you guys kind of teed me up for. My number 5 was the new manager additions, and I think that kind of sets me up well because the Phillies is one of your perfect examples of a team that last season had all the talent but couldn't make it work. They signed Real Muto, they got themselves Harper, they made all these additions, and somehow they still ended up being the Phillies of the last couple of years. So with that being said, they went and acquired Joe Girardi. The Giants of San Francisco went and got themselves Gabe Kapler. You got the Astros with Dusty Baker, which I'm sure we'll talk about them plenty in this podcast going forward. And then you also have the Angels with Joe Madden. So a lot of turnover, and it's not just regular turnover. It's a lot of turnover in terms of the fact that these teams have all gotten themselves pretty well-known managers. I guess maybe like Kapler, a little bit more of the new school mentality, but the other 3 guys are big-name managers that have had huge presences in baseball in the last 2 decades. So it'll be really interesting to see how they handle their new responsibilities. I'm particularly interested to see what Joe Madden is capable of with the Angels, and more than anything, Baker with the Astros, because he is such a good clubhouse guy, and he's clearly going to have a lot to deal with this season with what we're going to talk about later regarding the Astros. So I'm very intrigued to see what these like old school guys do as new managers. So that was number 5 for me. Alex, kicking it over to you for number 4.
Yeah, so my number 4 is going to be kind of like surrounding the oddities of this season in particular, because you're going to have such a shorter season. And one thing in particular that I'm excited to see kind of how it played out is the expanded rosters and how teams are able to shuffle between like their regular active squad and the taxi squad when there's no minor league season. Because without that minor league, you're basically calling up arms that haven't pitched at all lately, which is going to be kind of tough for to get back in the swing of things without like full rehab or full spring training or anything like that. So I think that's going to be interesting to look out for with a no minor league season and seeing how like teams and players can adjust for it. You'll have a lot more arms available to you.
Mm-hmm. That's a good one because I mean, one thing like Buck Showalter, the Orioles old manager, always said was like September baseball, playoff baseball, regular season baseball. They're three like completely different things because like in September, like you can have this like Billy Hamilton, Terrence Gore kind of guy on your bench that can get you a stolen base whenever the heck you need it. Whereas with a normal 25 or I guess now 26 man roster, you can't really afford a guy that can only run on your team. But now you can have guys like that. I mean, the lefty specialist is kind of out of the game now with the three batter minimum rule, but like you can just stash like super specialist guys now on your team that can play a big role.
Yeah.
Sorry, Zach.
No worries at all. My 4 is just the rise of two-way players. So we all know about Ohtani. I just clearly don't know how to pronounce his name. But we also have a couple other players that are attempting the rare pitching hitting combination, whether it's the Rays, Brendan McKay, or whether it's the Reds, Michael Lorenzo. I think it's definitely something I wanted to bring light to, considering we haven't really seen it before until like the last couple of years. So I'm not sure if this is just a coincidence, if this is going to be something that's going to be more popular to come, but it's interesting to see people try to be Babe Ruth-like in the MLB now with the hitting and pitching. So that was my number 4.
That is an interesting trend because I think, like, I personally think it's not going to become a big thing. I think Ohtani is such a rare case of somebody that came over from, a different country who was doing it all the time and doing both so exceptionally. I don't have a lot of faith in other players being able to replicate both levels of pitching and hitting at an MLB quality level. Not to say that there aren't people out there who are great at both, but I mean, we're talking the top, of it all. But that also is great because like Ohtani, that just points out to how special Ohtani is, and it also tees us up to see like if he takes that next step, because he's had a lot of injuries that he's dealt with since he's came over, but he's like an absolute like phenom in terms of what he accomplished abroad. So I'm very, very excited to see what he does. But that I'm also going to talk about that in a sec. What you got number 4?
Yeah, no, just to add to that, I think a lot of guys got drafted this week with that in mind, a two-way player in mind. I do think, Cy, you're probably more right, where it's going to be hard for someone to do it at the same time, but we'll see. That's a good one. Yeah, my number 4, similarly, kind of with some of the oddities, is how does the 2021 MLB draft shake out? Now, this is where I get my bias in, because obviously as an Orioles fan, this is the highlight of my year. It was this year, it will be next year, and probably for a couple more years after that. But so how does it shake out, both in terms of, obviously who gets the top picks? Because with this weird short season, does, a Tigers or an Orioles or a Marlins, play above their expectations for 50 games and get themselves out of one of those top 2 picks? And then does the MLB actually, because this was rumored that they're going to step in and like set the draft order, not based on the standings, given the short, weird season, which I think is ridiculous, because if you have this short season where you're comfortable crowning a champion, then you should be comfortable with being able to set the draft order based on that as well. So that would make me really upset if we like lost, moved from like 1 to 3 or some kind of weird lottery situation because the MLB chose to step in. But so I think it's going to be interesting, how the top of the draft order shakes out and how the MLB decides to react and change course a little bit. So
that's an interesting point, because just even from like this previous MLB draft, you had like the number 1 undisputed like Spencer Torkelson, and then like there are like a couple of other players that you could kind of mix and match. But to my knowledge, like he was like undisputably like the number 1 guy. But what do you think about the Orioles like Heston Kjerstad pick? Did you like that? I heard it was like a bit of a reach.
Yeah, so there were like 3 pretty elite prospects in this year's draft, Asa Lacy and Austin Martin. But that is the other thing with the MLB drafts. It's not like you're not necessarily just going in order of the best players, because there's the signability. So you get X number of dollars with your bonus pool, which slightly varies amongst the teams, and you can use it however you want. So it's like teams are, and the Orioles with Mike Elias, who did this in Houston, always like he loves going under slot with a high pick so he can save money on later picks with like high school players and like sophomores in college that are tough to sign because they can just go back to school. So like I actually like Heston Kjerstad a lot. I think we all expected the Orioles to do a little more with that extra money, like get like Nick Bitsko got taken before us, but like a big name high school guy. So I think overall, when you look at it, I think it's a good haul we got. It's maybe not as exciting as we wanted. And I do like Heston Kjerstad. But it was kind of a surprise to see them pass up on Austin Martin. I think everyone figured that's where they were going. But if you look at it, it's not that much of a surprise, because Elias and Houston did that with Carlos Correa. who they picked 1-1, even though he was like a number 10-ish level prospect. And then they flipped it around with their second round pick to get Lance McCullers Jr. and take him away from his scholarship. So that one worked out really well. I hope a similar situation works out here with Heston and some of our other high school kids we picked at the end of the fifth round there. But all right, that's my draft spiel. I'm glad I got it in, but I took it away. Thanks, Zach.
We knew that was coming. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, man, you deserve your chance to talk about the Orioles' relevance, and by relevance, the draft. Okay, yep. Moving on. Number four for me is also Zach. Do you have any takes on the Orioles as a part-time Nationals fan? I know it changes for you every now and then. So
I love the draft.
I don't actually care about your take. I was just setting you up to make fun of you.
I echo everything that Evan said. I do wish that we got Austin Martin though, because I was really looking for that new second base Brian Roberts type of person to just lead that franchise for 10 years to come at that same position. But that's my 2 cents.
Yeah. For any of the viewers and listeners, Brian Roberts is the last time, when he was playing was the last time Zach even ever watched an Orioles game. So
I was 12.
That was the reference. Okay, moving on. Number 4 for me is going to be the two teams out in LA this season with the Los Angeles Angels and the Los Angeles Dodgers. Both of them had huge acquisitions this offseason, which I think sets up talking about them. The Angels with Anthony Rendon added to a lineup with the greatest baseball player of our generation, in my opinion, and Mike Trout. It's interesting because they went out and gave Rendon big money to kind of set themselves up for more success, but I don't really know how to feel about that because their pitching situation is still leaves a lot to be desired. I'll put it that way. But I do think it's really intriguing to see him moving over from the East to play with what Mike Trout had sets up maybe the best 1-2 punch in baseball. And Rendon, somebody that has not gotten his credit for a long time. He's been one of the best players in baseball in terms of, hitting and defense in the last 4 to 5 years. And until they won the championship last year, I feel like he was pretty slept on. So it'll be really, really interesting to see him playing with Trout. But even more than that, the Dodgers, who were arguably already the best team in baseball last season, go and add maybe the second or third best player in all of baseball, Mookie Betts. The rich just continue to get richer. It's unbelievable. They already have insane rotation depth. They already had an absolutely loaded lineup. They already had a great bullpen, and then you add Mookie Betts. It's honestly kind of unfair. And the question I have is, you do all of that, how do you not win a championship this year, right? Like if you add Mookie Betts to all these things that you have, you're paying probably the most money in baseball. I haven't checked recently, but I'm going to assume they're, if not the highest, one of the top 2 to 3 teams in terms of the amount of money they're spending. If they don't win a championship this year, I would just be completely I don't even know what to say. I mean, they have been screwed to a certain extent in the last couple of years, but at the same time, it would blow my mind if you couldn't do it in that situation. I don't think you could ever do it, right? So very intrigued to see what's going to happen with both the LA teams this year. So, yeah.
And they better win the title because they only get Mookie Betts for 50 games. So, and they gave up Verdugo plus. They did get David Price for, I think, another year or two. And he'll be a contributor as well. But yeah, they better take advantage of it.
Yeah. Yep. Any thoughts, one, before you move on to the next one?
No, I just echo that. The Dodgers really have an embarrassment of riches with their roster, where they can go so deep in every position, and the amount of depth they have there, both on the MLB roster and the upper levels of the minor league, is scary for other teams in the National League.
Yeah.
Definitely. All right, you're up on number 3.
Okay, so kind of transitioning from a team that Cy just talked about, I'm interested to see how the short season and expanded playoffs gives teams that are on the rise or that have always been on the fringes of playoff competition maybe a better chance to make the playoffs and succeed this year. And a couple of teams that I'm looking out for are, like Cy mentioned, the Angels. I think that the short season really benefits them because they have the talent on that roster where in 50 games you never know what could happen. So they could definitely make a run. But teams like the Angels, the Rangers, the Padres, the Reds, and even some up-and-coming teams like the White Sox or the Blue Jays, I think this short season really gives them a chance for their talent to shine and potentially make a playoff run.
That's a really good point, Alex. Especially with what's going to be awkward is if one of those teams ends up making it, as a fringe team, and then there's clearly one of those teams that has a loaded roster that didn't get the number of games to kind of put it together, especially if you have like a new team, like if you have new additions and stuff. I'm sure 50 games, you're still working through a lot of like the chemistry and kind of piecing everything together. So it's going to be really interesting to see how heated people get when those kinds of teams don't make it. But one of these teams that just has not been able to make it for 3-4 years and have been fringe making it, I think that would cause a little bit of frustration. So I'm curious to see how people handle that. Yeah.
All right, guys, my 3 is I'll start with maybe a story here. So back in like 2016, 2017, forget what season it was, but my dad and I, so my roommate from college, he worked for the Nats. And so he was able to get my dad and I crucial Game 5 playoff tickets for the Cubs Nats elimination game in Nationals Park. And I'm not sure if you guys remember this game or not, but it was a crucial game because
I remember
it was one of the longest games in baseball history, and the Nats were winning. And then the Nats were winning for the majority of the game. And then the Cubs kind of came back and they had like a 1 or 2 run lead, but we had the bases loaded. We had a great opportunity. There's like 1 out or something like that. And we had a player steal to first or the player steal to second or third base, and they were called safe. And because of the video replay, they were actually called out. And it was because, like, when you look at it from like a microscopic level, like, okay, yeah, he like barely took his foot off of the base as he was like coming up from his slide. And then like the umpire called him out because of new technology. And I think not only that, but then also the amount of pitching changes that unfolded from the Cubs to try to like strategically get the Nationals out, and ended up being a 7-hour game. And a lot of Nats fans were left very disappointed because we lost by like 1 run. It was ridiculous. And it ended with like a Bryce Harper strikeout, I believe. So my thing is this: the new MLB rule change, I believe, states that to try to like reel back those long games, I think relievers have to pitch to 3 batters in a row or finish the later half of the inning. I love this rule because I think it'll speed baseball back up, but I'm not sure if you guys saw that rule change or not, but I think that's a great one. So I think, just to reiterate, like the new MLB rule change allows it says that relievers must face at least 3 batters, or they have to pitch to the later half of the inning until the end of the inning. Yeah, exactly. So what do you guys think about that?
Well, what do I think about that game? That game still haunts my nightmares.
Oh, please, you guys!
I feel like you should be over it now. You got your title.
Come on. Don't be sitting here complaining about that.
That was one of the weirdest games in baseball history because, like Zach said, it took so long, and you had there's one inning where Max Scherzer came in as a reliever and gave up 3 runs based on like misplayed balls, and like that inning, Matt Wieters had 3 pass balls in the same inning. It was just like a complete shit show. The freaking Matt Wieters that inning. And then like Zach was saying, that was a Jose Lobaton diving back into first base, and he was called safe, and then like his foot barely came off the bag, and then like the tag was still on, so they called him out via video replay review. It was
That's
just
what it was. It was diving back to first.
He was diving back to first place on a pickup. Really strange game, and it's just like one of those things that like at that point the DC was cursed and the Nationals were cursed, so like nobody should have been surprised.
Because I think the Nats were first place then. I think they were either like first place or they were like favorited over the Cubs. But I just remember like so distinctly, like my dad and I walking out like in sheer anger from like how long the game was because the amount of pitching changes that the Cubs enacted, and then also getting like thrown out because of a microscopic viewpoint when he was sliding back to first base. And like those 2 things, I was like, they need to change that. And like, because that was like a 7.5 hour game. It was crazy.
That's Baker's last game as Nationals manager.
I love us talking about that. I love you guys bringing up that game particularly because if there was one person I would blame more than anyone else for you guys losing that game, I blame Matt Wieters. And Evan was like the biggest Matt Wieters truther. He was the biggest Matt Wieters truther out of everyone. He, as an Orioles fan,
he was like, man,
Wieters, one of the best catchers of baseball. Like the Nats got him, blah blah blah. And then of course he's the reason that they end up losing that series. So there's some great irony in that.
And speaking of nightmares, I have nightmares about that because our current face of the franchise, Adley Rutschman, has a lot of Matt Wieters similarities. 1-1 switch hitting catcher. Oh boy, if he turns out to be another Matt Wieters, we got problems. But
we hope for the best. Yeah. What's your number 3, bro?
And on that game, actually, wasn't that Sad Expos fan game?
Yeah, it was. I think
It was. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
My guy.
Little Scott.
Yeah. Anyway, but yeah, my number 3 is actually similar. It's like rule changes and how this impacts it. So I'm actually not sure if this came to a head, but I think, do we have the designated hitter in both leagues this year? I don't know if we know if they've come with a final decision, or did they?
I think we do.
I don't believe so. I don't think I don't think it's been confirmed yet.
Well, because the last thing I heard is they're sticking to the geographic divisions, which means you have to switch up like the leagues. Like it's not all going to be national versus American. It's going to be.
Yeah. So if they do stick to that format, I think it is DH across the board. So, so I'm curious to see, does this give the MLB an opportunity? Because I think they wanted to do that for a long time, is to make the DH. And I do think they need to, one way or the other, align the two leagues, just for my sake. So I'm curious to see if this gives them an opportunity to make the DH in both leagues moving forward, permanently, not just in this weird Corona season. And then, like Zach said, other rule changes. I mean, obviously the 3-batter minimum already went through before all this happened. But like, do we see even further expanded rosters on a permanent basis or stuff like that? Like, how does this kind of experience maybe open the door for future rule changes or things like that? So similar to Zach's.
Yeah.
Here's the thing, which is funny because like number 3 for me was also the rule changes. One of them being the pitcher pitching 3, or like you really pitcher having to face 3-batter rule. Like their minimum 26-man rosters, which would be a huge change. Like I know one player doesn't seem like a whole lot, but in the grand scheme of things, it ends up being a massive deal, whether that's another relief player, another utility player, another pitcher. Either way, like a 26-man roster, I think is going to be really interesting, especially with a shortened season. It's going to be weird having them integrate that the first time around in a short season. And
I think it'll be even more though for the short season.
That's true. Yeah. But just in general, the fact that they're going to have a little bit of a roster, and then also the ideal was smaller September rosters this season, but I think that's going to be a little bit varied just based on with the way that it all works out with the way the season's starting. I want to address real quick what Evan talked about, as well as the 3-man rule or the 3-batter minimum. I agree that it speeds up the game. I agree that it'll make the game more fun for a lot more casual viewers. As far as the 3-batter minimum goes, I personally am not a huge fan of it. I think, and then I'll also go on to the DH part. I personally am not a fan of them getting rid of the DH in the NL. I realize, again, it'll make the game more fun, and people will probably root for that because they like hitting and however we want to interpret it. And I fully agree. Like, and in terms of entertainment, I'm not disagreeing with that. But me personally, I think the beauty of baseball is in its nuances. Like baseball has always been such a beautiful game because of the strategy behind it. It's not about pure like brute like force or anything like that. It really just comes down to like the simplicity of it, and what makes it so special to me is the simplicity of it. And I personally think the whole lefty specialist, or bringing in pitchers in particular situations and playoffs and big games to get that big out is like a very fun part to me. One thing we have to realize is, for example, in the playoffs, if you want to use, you're down to your last out, or you're down to like your last 2 batters, and you want to bring out one of your aces, like your starters, and they just pitched like 100 innings, or like they pitched over 100 pitches the game before, and you want to see them come out and pitch that big game. Those are the little moments that we're going to start missing out on, that I truly just do not want to see, because even if it makes the game a little bit longer, it's a very big strategic part of the game, and something that a lot of managers have either made more money off of or gotten fired off of. That's why I think it's such a crucial little nuance that we have. And then as far as the DH goes, like, I'm an NL guy. I love having pitchers that can hit. Like, I love watching pitchers that can rake. It's so fun to me. Like, when Mad Bum hits home runs, the Mets have always been notorious for having guys that can hitting pitchers. Like, I just love watching that. I think it's super entertaining when they go out there and make a big play. And then also the strategy with bunting and kind of moving batters over, putting pitchers in the 8 spot versus the 9. All those things are just so entertaining to me. I don't want to see the NL lose its DH personally. So we'll see. But I'm sure I set up a lot of thoughts for you guys. So please go ahead.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with you on that point of going to miss the DH, miss pitchers hitting in the National League. And I'm surprised you didn't bring up one of the best moments in baseball the last couple of years, Bartolo Colon's
Colon. Yes, sir. As soon as you said best moment, I was like, I know where this is going. And Padres Stadium, I will always remember that. I watched that live. Yeah, exactly. Things like that will be missed, and I would be so sad to see gone. That's how I feel. Ev, I know you're an AL guy, so you might have a different take. Zach, I don't know how you feel about it, but
I actually love the strategy of the NL. I just kind of want the two aligned, and I understand that the way to align it is to make the DH universal. But I do love the strategy of the NL. But Zach, go ahead with your.
I definitely agree with what you're saying, Sai. Like it's America's pastime. I like what you touched on with managers are fired or recognized as like some of the best managers when they make those crucial decisions involving like pitching changes and whatnot. And so I think that was like a good point. And like that kind of separates like the regular like status quo manager to some of the best and that are like widely recognizable around the league because of the strategic moves and decisions that they're making from like a pitching front. And so I think to that point, when you mentioned the three batter rule, I thought that was interesting and definitely understandable.
Mm-hmm. Appreciate it. Alex, you're up for number 2, buddy.
All right, my number 2 storyline going into the year is all the young talent in baseball. Baseball's had a wave of young talent last couple of years, and I was excited to watch them continue to develop and turn into superstars. Specifically, building off of like Juan Soto's playoff last year, it'd be fun to see what he can do if he can make the jump from all-star level player to superstar MVP type jumps. And a couple of other young guys that come up in baseball last couple of years that I think are really ready for a breakout and to reach the next stratosphere of being complete superstar level. Look at guys like Ronald Acuna of the Braves, Walker Buehler, and Jack Flaherty on the pitching side, as well as some of the younger guys, like to see if they really have what it takes to live up to their prospect pedigree, like Eloy Jimenez of the White Sox, or somebody who would be interesting to watch this year with the expanded rosters and see how they use that is Wander Franco of the Rays, the top prospect of all of baseball, who might have been considered a year away, but with no minor league season this year, are the Rays going to call him up and get him some ABs this year to see what they got in him? So that's young talent in baseball is one of the big storylines that I'm looking out for.
Vlad Guerrero and Fernando Tatis, those two were, just came up very recently, and those are two of the biggest names in baseball over the past several years in terms of prospects. I'm really intrigued to see if Vlad Guerrero can take that next step because, some people hail him as the best hitting prospect maybe ever coming out of the minors. Like he's been in that conversation. So very excited to see him. And then we talk a lot about the Padres. I know Ev's big on them. That Tatis is a big one for me because he already started taking those steps. Like he had a solid chance at Rookie of the Year, and then now another year removed, I feel like he's going to start reaching that superstar level. So definitely excited about that.
Joe Adell's another one. I think that's such an interesting one of like how do teams handle prospects now that from a service time they probably come up mid-year, but now it's like, especially for teams that plan on competing, it's like, do I punt the service time that I was going to gain, or it's just like, how do I handle it? I mean, there's going to be so many interesting cases like that, and each team's going to be different. But
definitely.
Yeah. All right. Well, for my number 2, I wanted to touch on just some of the recent stars. I know we've talked about this a little bit, but some of the stars joining these baseball conglomerates, being the Yankees and the Dodgers. So, I know we mentioned Mookie going to LA, joining like Bellinger, Seager, Kershaw, Price, etc. And then you also have Cole joining, the Yankees on a $300+ million deal, joining Chapman, Judge, Giancarlo Stanton, all these different players. And it makes me upset because I think Sai was actually someone who mentioned this earlier. The rich are getting richer. And like, I just don't understand why there is not a salary cap in baseball like there is in the NFL and like there is in the NBA. And I'm not sure if you guys can like maybe expand on that, but until that gets resolved, you're just going to continue to see teams outbuy the others. And like, to no surprise of its own, like that would destroy the mid-market organizations, like some like the Milwaukee's or like the Milwaukee's like maybe an exception because of Yelich and whatnot, but like Baltimore and some of those other teams that can just never get to the forefront because they can't outpay other organizations for players.
Yeah, I don't think baseball should have a salary cap. That's just something that I will never ever think it should be a thing. I think part of baseball not having a salary cap keeps athletes playing baseball too. To be honest, like you were just talking about the fact that people were concerned about baseball, fading out and people not wanting to watch it. But to a certain extent, you got to be worried about people playing it too. And one of the great things about baseball for a lot of players is when you play baseball, you get paid what you're worth in a lot of situations compared to a lot of other sports. And I think that's very important. I also think with how big baseball rosters are and with the inclusion of minor league teams and all these other factors, a salary cap is very important. Although it's not fun to always watch the teams with the most money win, that's not always the case. And it lends itself to different strategies and different utilization and trying to win. I mean, look at the Athletics. You have you would never see like fun, interesting things like that exist if baseball wasn't set up the way that it was. It's not like the teams that always win are the teams with the most money. If that was the case, the Dodgers would have won every year for the last several years, or the Yankees had several years of not being very good or relevant. Baseball isn't just about money. It's about developing your own team and your own system. A lot of the teams that are the most successful now are the teams that really invested in their minor leagues and made the right trades and built them up from the ground up. Even whether you want to talk about the scandal or not, the Astros are a great example of that. The Cubs, even the Nationals and even the Dodgers, even with the money that they've spent, some of their best players are the players that they grew at home. And it's one of the most impressive things about the Dodgers actually is like they keep bringing, every time someone goes down, it seems like they bring someone else up from the minors that turns into some stud, and it's super frustrating because they already have the money and they are able to do that. So I just think salary cap should stay the way that there shouldn't be a salary cap in baseball. That's how I'm always going to feel. And there's a luxury tax, so that kind of accounts for not spending too much. So yep.
Yeah, I agree with Cy. I mean, when I go back to it at the end of the day, I think the players should be paid what they're worth for their talent. And all a salary cap does is prevent those more wealthy teams from paying those players what they're worth. It's not going to, if you restrict how much the Dodgers and the Yankees spend, it's not going to make teams like the Rays and the Marlins pay their players anymore. That's just like not how baseball's economic works. So if it has to be teams like the Dodgers and the Yankees that are more of the wealthy, and even the Nationals that are more of the wealthy teams that get Max Scherzer $35 million a year, get Trout $40 million a year, whatever, so be it. I'm all in favor of that.
Yep.
Yeah, I agree with everything you guys said. I mean, I think the almost like David and Goliath from an economic standpoint, nature of baseball is like so much fun to watch. And you look at like the Angels is another team that not only do they spend like crazy, but they manage to draft, one of the greatest players projecting out in baseball history late in the first round of the draft. And yet they still can't even make the playoffs. I mean, and you have teams like the Rays and the A's that consistently year in and year out are there just through their analytics. And their scouting departments. Like, I just think that's kind of the cool thing about baseball, and it makes it so much fun for like small market teams to be like, man, I want to take down the big boys so bad.
Yeah,
and it does make it more difficult, but I just think that's the cool part about it.
Ev, that was a great point, man. The David versus Goliath is truly a big factor. The other thing is I would flip it. I would say that you look at the NBA and NFL and some of that. Well, NFL is different because it's a team cap. But if you look at the NBA, for example, it's actually totally unfair the way they do it, in my opinion. Like, how is LeBron James making the same amount of money as other guys on max contracts? It makes absolutely no sense. So, like, if you did it that way, LeBron James should be making like triple what some other max players make. But that's just how it works because. Yeah, one, I think the owners are a little bit more greedy, and two, it's a competitive landscape, right? Because I feel like it factors more in a game which requires less elements to win. Baseball requires a lot more elements to win. That's the reason that I think salary cap is big. But go ahead, man.
Yeah, number two for me, back to a more baseball non-corona topic is this the year that some of these big rebuilds finally come to fruition? The two teams I'm looking at. The Chicago White Sox, who have built up a ton of young talent, and they've been really interesting in terms of extending guys before they even hit the bigs, like recently with Luis Robert, Nick Madrigal, those guys. So they have a ton of young talent piping up through the major league roster this year. They've added it with a bunch of big name free agent signings. They got Yasmani Grandal this year. So is this the year that the Chicago White Sox finally make a break into the postseason? Obviously, it's going to be a little easier with the expanded playoffs. Then the San Diego Padres being another one. Obviously, a ton of young talent there. Fernando Tatis, Chris Paddock coming up last year, guys like that. And they've obviously supplemented that with a ton of big name signings. Hosmer a couple years ago. And obviously more recently, Manny Machado. So I think those two teams, especially where those rebuilds land this year, is going to be super interesting. I think, and this was several months ago before Corona, and when we expected a normal season, I had White Sox in the playoffs as a wild card. Padres not quite yet because the pitching's not there. But it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out this year. I think both of them are close. I think the White Sox a little closer than the Padres maybe, but it's going to be interesting to see where those two teams and other teams in that kind of rebuild middle tier land.
It's going to be so fun to watch too, man. Like there's nothing more fun than when those teams, like over the years, you keep seeing them building and building a little bit, another prospect, and all of a sudden you're like, wait, what? Like the Padres are like just steamrolling through people. Like that's such a fun thing come to fruition, especially because it's so many young, like loaded players that you want to root for. I'm particularly excited about the Padres myself because I love guys like Paddock and like I love their like pedigree and aggression. And I also think Manny Machado bounces back in a big way. So I actually think the Padres will be very good. Again, I think pitching is important in that case. Before I move on, Alex, do you have a comment? I wasn't sure if you had something to say.
No, not really.
Okay.
I agree with Ev. It's going to be fun to watch those teams. And I think the short season is definitely going to be an interesting aspect of it because you'll see teams like that who their talent might shine for 50 games. But after, like most of the time, the young guns who haven't been there before tend to fade over the course of a long season. So I think those teams like the White Sox and Padres might actually benefit from only having the 50 to 80 game regular season. So
yeah, I agree.
Agreed. Although maybe the player development won't be as great as they would have hoped for while they're still on the rookie contracts. I think a lot of teams that have players in that situation kind of are going to be struggling. That's one thing I wanted to point to is expiring contracts. That's a big thing for me this season. It's just funny because initially that wasn't going to be on my list, but I was going to kind of loop it in. I think the expiring contracts is going to be a huge part of this season's like the way people feel about it, because there's a lot of players that are either have 1-year deals or coming towards the end of their deals, and all of a sudden like your season is no longer the long season that you had. So if these players, you sign a player for a lot of money for 1 year, you make a big trade and give up a bunch of prospects for a player like Mookie Betts, for example, and you don't win and you're stuck in this position where you don't make the playoffs because of it or something of that nature, that would be super frustrating for a lot of teams, and I'm sure several are in that position. That also lends itself to the NL East for me, which is my real number 2 in terms of my list, because I didn't want to talk about him earlier because I wanted to give him more credit than the number 5 spot, which is why I'm bringing it up now. But I am super excited about the NL East battle. I think it'll be not even arguable. I think it's going to be the best division of baseball, personally. I'm very, very, very curious to see what happens. I'll start with the Nationals, World Series champions. Congratulations, Alex. Even as your fellow rival, I have to acknowledge the fact that they came full circle and won the ship like in a very impressive way last year. With that being said, though, the pitchers on the Nationals, if you look at the top 3 guys that we mentioned earlier with Corbin, Strasburg, and Scherzer, they pitched 60% of the innings in the playoffs for the Nationals. And so this break, I'm sure, will be of benefit to them and will be helpful. But at the same time, that is a lot of innings. And it's not like Strasburg is my number 1 pick for durability and I don't know much about Corbin, but I don't think Corbin had several injuries back in the day, and he's coming back. Scherzer's the one guy that's been on a horse, but how long can he sustain that success of, getting older and pitching over 200 innings every season and pitching, into the playoffs? I'm curious to see what happens with the Nationals there. And then, of course, they lost Rendon, but guys like Soto and them are stepping up. I'm also really curious to see how Victor Robles starts developing more as like the uber prospect that he is. Even with them winning the World Series last year, he was more of like a good outfielder that wasn't like great offensively, but I think that he has a chance to really develop now with their departure from Rendon and getting more opportunities. And then, of course, my Mets, super excited about that. One thing that I think got lost with everything with COVID and everything else going on was the whole Carlos Beltran saga with us, where we hire him for literally a week and then have to get rid of him. It's the most Mets kind of situation to end up in. And it's really intriguing to me because like, I personally think we did the right thing letting him go. It sucks because we didn't know that, he was this lead guy and everything that was going on, which I'm sure we'll talk about more going forward. But that was really interesting. And we ended up with the clubhouse guy with Rojas. And then, of course, I'm super excited about the roster. Evan already talked about it earlier. We lost Syndergaard. I'm sad about that, but we did add Waka and Porcello, and Syndergaard actually did not have a great season last season. So I think we can replicate his success with those guys and take a step forward with the talent we had. But the other thing I want to talk about is our ownership, because we keep talking about selling. We almost did sell, and I was, as a Mets fan, I almost, did a skip and a hop and a dance around the house when I heard that we're gonna be moving off in Wilpons. Didn't happen. But one thing that's super funny right now is Alex Rodriguez keeps entering into the bidding and then dropping out and entering back into the bidding, and I'm like, what is going on? Because even though I hated A-Rod as a player, I love him as a businessman and investor, and him and Jennifer Lopez are making solid offers for the Mets here. So I'm fingers crossed, man. I'm super excited about that. And then of course the Braves and the Phillies. It's gonna be a fun. I think we touched on it enough to the point where I don't have to elaborate on those teams. It's gonna be really fun. I will come out here and say right now that I have no faith in the Phillies. That's a team I consistently worry the least about. I think Bryce Harper has been one of the most overrated players in baseball, and I think he continues to prove it as he goes, moves on to other teams. I think they made all these additions and couldn't do anything with them. I think it really just comes down to the other three teams and I think the Braves lead the charge this year in terms of the talent they have with what the Nationals lost, but I think the Nats and the Mets can kind of hold their own, and it'll be really interesting to see, especially with a shorter season, who really prevails in that kind of environment. So the NL East, I know I talked a lot there, but that's why I was like, I wanted to save that because the East is a big one for me.
Should we do a quick round of picks?
Of who we think is going to win the East?
Yeah. Should we go around pick a division winner?
Here's the question. Why are we just going to pick one, or are we going to say which teams from that in the division do we think are going to make the playoffs? Because in my opinion, I think it's going to be very close. Yeah. Because I could see 2 or 3 teams making it. That's me personally. Yeah.
I've got Braves winning the division, but I could see the Mets and Nats also making the playoffs in wildcard spots.
Yeah.
That's exactly my pick too. I think the Braves won the division, but the Mets and Nats can make the wild card spots. And also depending on how many wild card spots there are this year too, you never know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with the Braves as well, and I want to let you guys know in the MLB fantasy draft, if I'm the first overall pick, I'm going with Ronald Acuna.
Keeper league.
It's a keep. I think this goes to show how little Zach has been paying attention, because we have 4 keepers in fantasy baseball, and I don't see anyone dropping Acuna.
I have the first pick. I actually have the first pick, Zach. So
let's talk some trades.
Yeah, and also just so you know, the way we do the top 12 is reverse order. So by Evan stating that he has his first pick, he is readily admitting that he had the worst team in baseball, and keeping in mind the fact that only 5 people in that league pay attention, one of them being Evan.
A rough year. I like to align fantasy baseball rebuilds with my real baseball rebuilds in New York.
To talk about the strategy that Evan uses a fantasy baseball, man. Please.
It is unreal.
That's a whole episode.
Well, Ev wasn't just mentioning that he had the first pick. He was actively bragging that he had the first pick. He came in last year.
Can you please let the viewers know who your top picks were last season? I just want you to give them your top 4 to 5
keepers.
Yeah. Give us your keepers. Actually, let's talk about your keepers.
So Walker Buehler is my best keeper.
Okay.
Other than that, it's kind of Giancarlo Stanton is just the worst. So I kept him last year and he was not healthy the whole year. So I'm dumping him hard this year. I'm going to go Eloy Jimenez 1-1 to rebuild my young talent. I have a trade in place for Victor Robles as well. And I think I have Josh Hader as another keeper, but yeah, the new core is going to be Buehler, Eloy, Victor Robles, and maybe Hader. Unless I put him in that Robles trade, I might have. So
yeah, that's better than I anticipated. Given some of the Evan is one of those guys that's notorious for picking a guy that is in the 16th round in the second. That's the kind of guy that he is. He has his strategies about stacking and platoons and all these things, but it's very entertaining to watch. I will say that.
Yeah. He doesn't like having good players on his roster.
That's exactly it. It's I'm too obsessed with the prospects and the young unknown players of it all that it's not fun for me if I have a good roster, which is a really difficult challenge.
I will also before I forget to acknowledge it, I actually fully agree with both of you. Again, I also have the Braves winning the division and the Nats and the Mets both making the playoffs. I don't actually think the Braves are going to have the most success from our division this season, just because, again, I don't trust their pitching very much personally. Just because they're going to have to rely a lot on Soraka being a very young pitcher, and Faulty was good like 2 years ago, but then totally struggled. And there's just not a lot that is the Hamill show right now that they got over there, if I'm remembering correctly, and with all these headlines. Yeah. So he's a good innings eater and somebody who's like pretty solid in terms of like innings, but I just don't trust their starting pitching, and I'm a big starting pitching guy, so I personally think that's going to be a team to kind of I don't know. They keep making the playoffs as this like, high record. They won 97 games last season and got taken out the first round. And the year before they won the division had a bunch of wins and got taken out the first round. And I kind of see that happening again with the Braves. But yeah, I still think they'll win the division. They're built to the regular season is what I'll say. Alex, up to you.
All right, so on to the top storyline of all baseball this year.
Yep.
So I have a pretty good feeling that most of you guys are in agreement on the top storyline, and it sounds like we might all have the same number one. But for me, it's the Astros apology tour after getting caught cheating over the offseason. And I was excited to see how many fans were bringing trash cans to the game, and you kind of got a taste of it in spring training when Astro players got beamed left and right with the old classic beanball as a sort of revenge, and then just booed relentlessly anytime they're in visiting stadiums. So whenever the fans are coming back to that, I'm excited to hear that continue.
Can we talk about the apologies? Can we talk about the apologies too of Jose Altuve, Bregman, the rest of the staff? Like, they never truly like admitted it. Like, I think they were just trying to expedite that apology process, and like it came off like very insincere, I guess, and it was definitely construed that way. Like that's how I interpreted it. So I thought that was like one of the funniest parts, like in the aftermath, is they kind of like laid low for a little bit once they were fully exposed. They came out, they gave like, excuse my French, but like half-assed apologies, and then like they tried to move on and act like it had never happened before, and people were pretty upset by that.
Yeah, and I think Bregman is the best example of that. He's one of the cockiest, most outspoken guys in all of baseball, and then he comes out and his apology was embarrassing. Like he said, "Sorry, I have to apologize for something." Basically, like he's just doing that to get it to check that box and move on, and we lost a lot of respect for him.
Which is very frustrating too, because I know, and I think we all agree on this, there's a lot of likable players on the Astros before we found out about all this. Like I know we're big fans of Bregman. Altuve was so easy to root for as like this, smaller player winning the MVP, kind of setting people up. Even people like Correa and Springer, like they always had people that were really like, the Astros were an easy team to root for. And I think a lot of people in baseball did root for them. They wanted them to win. And that's why it's so sad to see it. I don't know if you guys saw, I was doing a little 104 kind of in the background, because that is the number of hit by pitches to break the record. So I'm sure that'll be absolutely blown out of the water, assuming they're not, teams aren't getting penalized too heavily for it. But what's interesting is, does everyone have I'm assuming we all have the Astros at 1, right?
Yeah.
But recent news lends itself to the Yankees also being potentially up in that spot. Is there any truth to that, Evan? I see you shaking your head. I know that a little bit of something popped up with the whole.
Yeah, I don't know what the story was, but this just came out the other day that in 2017, the Yankees in some way were stealing signs, and Manfred hit him with a quote unquote minor infraction, which hardly even made the news, and kind of like a slap on the wrist, even not hardly even that, because no one even heard about it. But I guess it's come out that there's some kind of letter that was written to the Yankees, I guess by Manfred, or there's some kind of proof that I think some DraftKings players who feel they were unfairly treated by the sign stealing scandals sued, I guess, baseball over this to release that letter.
That's
and
awesome.
I guess the talk is that, that sign stealing scandal was, one, a heck of a bigger deal than they made it out to be, and that, two, Manfred, for whatever reason, kind of covered it up. And gave them a much smaller penalty than they deserved. I don't know if there's any truth to that. That's just the latest talk, and we'll have to see. But there's a lawsuit out there that I think might make them release that letter, which will shed some light on it. But yeah, it's not just the Astros; it's Yankees and obviously Red Sox too.
Red Sox.
Gotten hit with it.
Yep. And here's my question to you guys. I'll tee this up because obviously I think anyone listening, anyone that's followed baseball even in the slightest knows how profound it is in terms of the Astros scandal and like how well known it is. And it's interesting because I was saying to Alex and Evan, I don't know that I've said this to you before, Zach, but I was saying to these two that this is the most attention baseball has maybe ever gotten off of this, right? Like people that I've never heard mention baseball in my life. Even people that like are from the DC area with the Nats winning the World Series that still hadn't talked about baseball after the Nats won the World Series were talking about this scandal, which was really interesting that it brought that kind of light to baseball, maybe in a little bit of a negative way, but in a very interesting way. A lot of teams do use sign stealing, but these people, on the Astros organization, a lot of people, Alex Cora, Carlos Beltran, a lot of people that were, or Alex Cora with the Red Sox, but a lot of these people were doing it to a level that we've never seen before. But at the same time, the question lends itself to this. The Astros were still a great team on the road in a lot of those seasons, right? They clearly have a lot of talent. Their pitching has been great. Their hitting has been great. I talked about some of their hitters. You have Verlander. Like, it's not like their pitching is, a Cy Young caliber players with Garrett Cole and Verlander in the last 2 years. It's not like the sign stealing was the reason that they were having such great seasons. But the question is, do we think the Astros are still on that level of a team in baseball where you would put them up there with the top teams in baseball still after all of this to be World Series competitors? Do you guys still think the Astros are on that level?
I mean, I think at this point, like, we honestly don't really know. Obviously, like, the talent is there. Like, there's some of those guys are pretty heralded prospects coming up, and they put up some pretty good numbers. But how much of those numbers are kind of aided by the trash can scandal and like the sign stealing? Because I mean, it's a lot easier to hit a curveball when you know it's coming. So I mean, they're kind of playing at a disadvantage, and you kind of take those numbers with a grain of salt. So I think this year we'll really find out if the Astros are for real or not. And I mean, in my opinion, I think they'll probably still be a really good team and a playoff team, but you're not going to have guys like Jose Altuve putting up 350 batting averages or George Springer putting up 35 plus home runs and stuff like that. So it's going to be interesting to see. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm definitely on the lookout for that. I still have them as one of the best teams, and they'd be my pick that went to win the AL West. But yeah, I don't think they're going to be as unbeatable as they've been in the last couple of years.
I would probably say that I don't think they're going to take much of a back step. I mean, if you look at the World Series last year, they beat the Nats away. They were 3-0 away, and then they just lost all 4 games at home, I believe. And so I think, if anything, if they take a back step, it's more so a reason of losing Garrett Cole and like that valuable like pitching rotation. I know they still maintain guys like Greinke and like Verlander and whatnot, and they have like arguably the best 1, 2, 3 in the game. Like they have so much depth from a hitting standpoint. So, just looking at their lineup, it's kind of hard to imagine them not being where they were last year and the year before. So I don't think they're going to take too much of a back step. And I think that there's historical data based on that in the World Series of them beating the Nats 3 games away.
Yeah, not you.
I've still got them winning the AL West, and even by a sizable margin, which maybe is more of a reflection of the rest of the AL West, although I like the A's, but the rest of the division's not that good. So I still have them winning that division by a decent margin. I think a small step back, but I don't really think they take that much of a hit, to be honest. But yeah, I'm just excited to see how everyone polices them. Like, have people forgot about it? I don't think so. I hope not. The issue is
no way.
Yeah, the fans can't help police it, unfortunately, which would have been fun to just see all that heckling, like Alex said, bringing trash cans and whatnot. So now it's as it always is. It's on the players on the other teams to police it. So I think it's going to be a heck of a lot of fun to watch. And then another thing I wanted to piggyback off of was talking about how this gained so much, whether it be interest or just attention towards baseball. Like, to our discussion at the beginning of the pod, like, baseball had such an opportunity to like capitalize on that, get this season going quick, and just keep riding out that momentum, be a sport that's like that they're playing while no other sports really are. Like, I just think, again, like we said at the beginning of the episode, like I think it's just another missed opportunity to capitalize on this big scandal in a weird way and take advantage of the extra attention and ride it out. So.
Sorry, I want to touch on the forgiveness aspect that you talked about. If there's one thing or one driving factor baseball has going for it, pettiness is one of those factors. I mean, you think about it. You got guys like, you'll see a pitcher hit a guy in the back, and everybody will be like, why did he hit him? Like, I don't know what's going on. And the pitcher will be like, 5 years ago, he like looked at a home run for like 10 seconds. So I hit him now. Like that's how baseball is. And the Astros did it to a level where they were literally banging on a trash can every time somebody was throwing an off-speed pitch. And somehow we're getting away with this. So I promise you there will not be a lot of forgiveness. Although going back to what I was saying before, I do think that they will still be great, but that's also what's frustrating about it to me, because they were so good as an away team. They were so good as an away team, and they had so much talent. And I truly believe that they will be able to win games. But that's what's also like so annoying about it, because why did they do it, right? Like why do you cheat in that way when when you clearly have proven that on the road you can be successful? You clearly have the time. You took the time to rebuild. That's what makes it so frustrating. Like you kind of compromise the integrity of the game with a team that was so easy to root for. And I truly believe that would have still had a lot of success. I'm not saying they definitely would have won a World Series, but at the same time, like I still think they would have been capable of it. Also, one thing I definitely want to bring up is the Astros and the Dodgers are the two teams, or not the Dodgers, the Astros and the Red Sox are the two teams that are, the most well known for the scandal situation that's going on. Both we're only talking about the Astros, but the Red Sox, you could argue, are almost on the same level in terms of the way that they cheated. And it's the Dodgers that had to face them in back-to-back years in the World Series when they were doing it. So you got I've very rarely in my life felt bad for Dodgers fans, but this is the one situation in which I'm like, man, I would be livid if I were them too. That absolutely sucks, because they, who knows? There's probably a solid chance they win maybe one, if not both of those World Series, if those teams weren't cheating, right? So that's one thing I can't help but think about. You guys got any more thoughts on it?
Didn't Dusty Baker come out and issue a public statement over his fear that a lot of his players are going to get beamed this entire season? Didn't Dusty come out and say something like that?
Not gonna work.
Yeah, well, I can't see that holding up.
I think he kind of has to, though, right? His role as a manager, and just he knows going into it that he's got to have their back. But that's also why I think he's such a great hiring.
Yeah, he's in an interesting situation because he didn't have anything to do with the sign stealing scandal, but now he's kind of in charge of making sure his players don't get harassed for it too much, and it's an interesting leadership position he's in right now.
Yeah. He's a good fit in that way, though.
Yeah.
You guys got any honorable? Sorry, go ahead, Alex.
Nah, I was just gonna say, big Dusty Baker fan. He's awesome.
Yeah, me too. I'm a Nationals fan. I remember we always talked about why did they fire him. I always thought you guys should have kept him, but I guess that's history now, right? Because you guys just won the World Series, so maybe I was wrong. One thing I want to point to is honorable mentions. If you guys have any, I have one in particular that I want to throw out. Chris Bryant and Nolan Arenado, the third base revolving trade wheel we got going on. Both of those guys were discussed heavily in offseason rumors, and I think if either of them end up getting traded, it could really shake up baseball. It's really interesting to see the Cubs in a position where literally just a few years after winning a World Series and having this dominant roster, considering trading away maybe one of the most valuable players, and then Arenado, who just got signed to a massive deal by the Rockies, was being floated a lot in trade rumors. So that's one that I wanted to throw out there, because it's pretty surprising. Those are two players that I did not ever think I would see on the trading block, and that kind of blew my mind. I'm really curious to see how teams are change their strategies these days. So don't know if you guys have any thoughts on that, or if you had any other honorable mentions.
That's a good one, actually, as an honorable mention. Me thinking more from a smaller market team perspective on being able to pull off. Obviously, I guess there's no trade deadline this year if the season's so short, but it's being able to deal some of your more veteran players at the deadline, get a prospect for some cash here or there, and kind of expedite that rebuild. Are we do that? It looks like not. So it looks like a lot of veteran players that you might have had on your roster as potential trade chips all of a sudden just become DFA candidates that you get nothing for, which is fine. I mean, I'm thinking about some of the lesser known players, maybe from the Orioles' perspective. So it's not like they're going to be a big haul, but some teams might have guys, that they really wanted to unload and might not be able to.
That is a great point, man. That completely changes the dynamic of baseball. There's so many teams that in the past couple of years that had deep playoff runs or won World Series is because of the trades they made at the deadline. you never go into the season with a perfect roster. Every team that ends up having success ends up making some sort of maneuvering or deals. And like, I can't think of the last time a team didn't make some form of a trade to kind of revamp their team or add some depth, or, you know, that's, it's crazy. The teams aren't going to be able to do that. Basically what you have now and what you have in the minors is all you get, right? That's pretty wild to think about.
Yeah. And I don't know if they're not going to be able to or what the case is, but do they even want to? Like, is it worth going for this title? And, you know,
what are the trade values?
Yeah.
And how does it affect trade values? Like, if it's a shorter season and these guys are only going to be on your team for, like, you know, 20 or so games in the regular season, and then the playoffs, like, how much are you willing to, you know, give up as a team that wants to acquire them for, you know, half a season? I know that's really interesting.
Yeah, and to Ev's point, a lot of these small market clubs sign those veteran players specifically to trade them at the deadline. If you're out of contention, you just find these middle relievers who might be you pay them a couple $1 million, and then with the intention of dealing him for a prospect or two at the trade deadline. So it kind of hurts them in that state too. Yeah, pretty much.
That's annoying. Yeah, definitely slows down rebuilds for some teams for sure. Yeah. Any thoughts, Zach? Any honorable mention?
Yeah, I would say my honorable mention is I know I mentioned the rise of two-way players. Now it's the rise of two-team supporters. I'm a big Orioles fan and a Nationals fan. But I think even more so than that, me actually getting into baseball, just listening to you guys, a lot of it is like, it sounds like a foreign language to me, but it definitely encourages me to try to like follow the sport more, get more involved with it. And you know, hopefully if there's a season, that will happen. So I guess my honorable mention was not, you know, not what you would expect it, I guess you could say.
Yep. Fair enough. And Alex is our honorable guest. Any last thoughts?
Yeah, I guess one honorable mention I would put up there is just like historic chasing of the numbers. You had guys like Albert Pujols who were inching closer to 700 home runs, and it really hurts guys like that are losing a half a season to where they could have get their numbers, and guys chasing specific career milestones like that.
That's a very good point. A condensed season for guys that were, Scherzer with strikeouts. There's definitely a lot of those.
Yeah.
Yep. All righty. Well, with that being said, I think that was a pretty complete segment. Alex, thank you very much for joining us. I think it was perfect to have you for baseball. We were kind of saving you for that, given the fact that your Nationals just won the World Series, so we wanted to give you a chance to talk about that, but also the fact that we constantly are blowing up group chats talking about baseball with each other. So always.
Thanks for having me, guys. I had a lot of fun. Yeah. So.
Yeah, man.
By all means. I was going to say, I see if you had anything to say, but there it is. So with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, thank you as always. That was Mondays Down South.